Hello, and welcome to a very special episode
of Pulp Kitchen.
Yeah. And we're in.
Hello, everyone. If you're listening to this, I advise you to try and watch it because we are in a very different situation today. We're out of the studio. We're out of the office. We are in the beautiful surroundings of
Primrose Hill. It's
Look
a
at this.
gorgeous day. For no reason at all, we just sort of went, should we do this outside?
Should we do this outside? Let's take this outside.
Because it was cold, and then it just we looked at the weather forecast, and it's going to be very crisp, very sunny, 22.
It's also slightly content driven in the sense that this week we're not going to be reviewing films this week because there's a little break in the schedule, which is fun. We've got loads of great films coming up. We're going to be reviewing The Substance next week.
Oh, yeah.
London Film Festival coming up. And we thought, let's make things a bit different. And what way to make things different than go outside in the last of the summer sun. Still 100%. Technically summer until the end of September, by the way.
It's beautiful. If you are listening, flick on the video, you can see the beautiful London skyline. We're at just sort of on the top side of Primrose Hill, near where I live, and it's just absolutely pristine. It's not too loud, I think. It's very peaceful. There's a handful of dogs running around. It's people who sort of aren't really working on this Tuesday, just sort of moseying. Yes. Tourists.
Everyone's welcome. Obviously, because we are doing it differently, we are in a one-shot today, and there might be dogs running in, so just bear with us if there's any sort of like rough edges to this episode, but we want to try something different.
We're embracing this sort of more casual Pulp Kitchen cool style.
Yeah, it's a picnic. It's a picnic with Pulp Kitchen today.
Yeah. I'd love to do this again, even through the winter, if we can justify the cold.
Yes.
With a little flask of
Maybe
hot
we could
tea.
be sponsored by like what's some like Patagonia or something to like really get us
some
through.
Really good goose further down. Puffs.
I want to wear the Pierce Brosnan "World's Not Enough" jacket that inflates with the
like
avalanche.
A fantastic reference. Yes,
Thank
exactly.
you very
When
much.
things just get too cold at a football stadium, Electra.
So much of that film I didn't understand in terms of like when he cuts it, like green smoke comes out of it or something. When I was a kid, it was all too much.
I feel like Pierce Brosnan's early film. We'll just go on tangent here. Pierce Brosnan's early films have a bit of a rough time aging, don't they?
Pierce Brosnan's
early Bond films.
Early Bond
films.
films.
Maybe all of them.
Well, we talked in Double Take this week. We went on a tangent. We mentioned Mamma Mia. Lovely. We went into
belched.
Yeah, this is what we're having when people just walk by belching.
Unassuming old lady.
We are really in the thick of it with everyone here. But again, bear with us.
Yep.
Yeah, we talked about Mamma Mia, which I watched for the first time, and Pierce Brosnan, I said, is I still believe is one of the most handsome men, the most handsome man to have ever lived.
Astonishing.
And
beautiful.
Handsome at every age. What we were saying.
Exceptionally well dressed.
And when he was Bond, he was like, wasn't Bond until he was 45.
Yeah, guys, if you're not just. Don't rush this
Don't
process.
rush it,
you could get cast as James Bond in your 40s.
Pierce Brosnan looks like a guy who has never rushed. He's always been perfectly on time for everything.
My
Mercedes-Benz.
Mercedes-Benz.
Mrs. Doubtfire. Oh, that's a little Trump-esque. I didn't like that. Mrs. Doubtfire. No, it's
Stu.
Yeah, all the time.
I'm allergic to pepper.
Yeah, Mrs. Doubtfire, I'm allergic to pepper.
You live to die another day. Zow.
You've got Donna. Whatever happened to our love? Pierce Brosnan and Russell Crowe very much sharing the sort of celebrity who can't sing in a musical.
But God damn it, they did it anyway.
Yeah, for Les Mis for Russell Crowe.
No, he's always in exceptional suede and like a gorgeous leather side bag getting off a plane. And sometimes he does the twirly moustache.
Yeah, because he's full grey now. He's a full Silver Fox.
But he's Silver Fox 100% right. And sort of premium sort of gorgeous cotton shirt that's slightly undone with a suede jacket, gorgeous boots.
I bet he's got a great handshake. I bet he smells good.
Like a
great
musky
cologne
tone with an oaky finish.
I bet he has a cologne bottle that looks like a bottle of decanted whiskey.
I can smell it even though he's not here.
Yeah.
I can just imagine that he smells
sweet
good.
but
Yes,
smoky.
Whiskey, yes.
I
Barrel-aged.
love him.
Pierce, always welcome.
Always welcome onto the show.
But today we wanted to, as you said, it's a different format.
Yeah.
For any of you who follow us on social media, we do this fun little series called Film Bites where we collaborate with other film influencers in our space. Anyone who likes films, talks about films. They have really great potential to get really good views. We put a lot of punchy, big questions out there, like what is the best film you've seen in the last year, or who's the best actor working today. And we've actually done quite a lot of these in the last few weeks.
We've got loads of great coming out.
Lots to come out. And me and George have just been thinking, why don't we cherry pick a couple of these?
Yeah.
And unpack them in a slightly more longer form content on this podcast, not so obliged on chopping it up for social media, and open up the discussion.
Yeah, so how it's good, we've chosen 5 questions that we normally ask on Film Bites. And what we're going to do is James and I are going to give our own individual answers. We're also going to talk about some of the answers we've been given on Film
really
Bites
common
by regular people we've asked. And also we want to talk about your responses as well. We asked on the Discord, we asked on Instagram.
At
Loads
Pulp
of people
Kitchen
responded, which is great.
Okay, it's always important to follow us because we do often call to the followers to give us this mass hoard of data, which is really useful, and it does feature on the show. So make sure you're following us and following the stories, because we'll whack these questions up a few days before we record, and you can be a part of the show. And I think we've always said we should do this more when there's a film that is out for you guys. I'd love to be like, send us your thoughts on Blink Twice and feature them more on the show. So I think we should be better at doing that in the future, and go follow the channels.
There's always more for us to do. We are trying. Just remember, it is James and I. Always just 100%. It's just him and I doing the whole thing. Yeah. So, the setup
today we're doing it outside.
We did turn up today on Primrose Hill, completely over encumbered with bags.
Yeah.
Like I said, it felt like we were in King Kong and James was Jack Black, like scouting for a location. I was sort of
Mr. Denham.
Yeah, the guy in the background with the old timey
I
camera.
gotta make my motion picture.
Are you sure about this, Sam?
He's holding a shaky latte.
Anyway,
it's great. So we're only doing 5 questions today.
Just 5 questions today,
and there's plenty more to do. So I think if we enjoy this and you guys enjoy it, we'll pick up 5 other questions down the line.
Bear with us; it's a new format, but let's have some fun. We're outside. I have a feeling we just recorded double take prior to this that the oxygen and the sunlight is really energizing us. I feel like we're glowing like Edward Cullen in Twilight.
Sometimes there's nothing wrong with my flat, but when you speak very intensely for 2 hours straight, it can get stuffy. The ideas get a bit sort of self-circulated, and you need to just get some fresh oxygen.
You went a bit Matt Smith there. Time, space, over.
Cracks in the walls.
Yes. Amy Pond, yes. Anyway, so let's get on with our 5 questions about film that we'll be talking about today. So, we have 5 questions today, guys. Here are the 5 questions. Who is the best actor working today? What film franchise is overrated? What movie makes you cry? What is the best movie to see on a date? And what movie is underrated? But we begin with who is the best actor working today?
Huge question.
Absolutely huge.
As soon as I started to think about this, I thought, fuck this question, because I have so many great options. Like, people on my list include Joaquin Phoenix, I've been very impressed with recently. Jesse Plemons, I think, is just an amazing addition. Emma Stone, I think, is on fire. Recently, from Quiet Place Day One, Lupita Nyong'o is absolutely killing it. And I know she won an Oscar for 12 Years a Slave, which she was also brilliant in, but I can really see her getting that kind of awards attention for the right role at the right time. Mark Rylance was very close for me as an actor who maybe really acts like Mark Rylance. He's got such a classical theatre background and sort of brings all of that softly spoken twinkliness into film. Michael Shannon we love. Claire Foy we love. Daniel Day-Lewis we love, but not working today. Or so we think. No. Who knows? We'll see. But based on a film that we recently saw, I think one of the best actors working today is Michael Fassbender. Yeah. And he had actually taken a break for a few years, but just seeing him be a small role in Kneecap and bringing the drama that really carefully crafted narrative needed in that. And if you've seen Kneecap, you can check out our review. You know the kind of role he plays is really important. And I just realized that this guy is really good at what he does. Obviously, he can do sinister very well. We've seen that recently in films like The Killer and even in X-Men. You could say he's got that villainous shark-like stare, but also he can carry emotion and depth and weakness as part of all of that. I really think he's such a fantastic addition to any film. He's in one of my favorite films, which is Shame, and it's a really underseen film, which I think more people should watch, and he's so wonderfully steely-eyed and vulnerable in that film, and I'm just so excited to see him in stuff. And The Killer's a film I keep sort of thinking back to as a recent example of how good he is, and I just think Michael Fassbender is about as good as it gets when it comes to casting. He's absolutely brilliant.
I think he's fantastic, and I think I'm looking forward to this kind of second era of Fassbender now. He's had his break, he's now a father, he's like established his family.
He's bought a couple of houses from the X-Men movies. Congrats, Michael Fassbender.
Congrats. Very good, very good. Yeah. So for me, similar, like so many to choose from. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would have hands down said Adam Driver. Yeah. I still think Adam Driver is a phenomenal actor, one of the best of his generation. But I think since Marriage Story, I'm yet to see a Adam Driver performance that has made me also feel again like, wow, this is one of the best actors of his generation. Marriage Story made it, and then since then he's done interesting work, and good for him. He's trying different things, Megalopolis, 65, Ferrari, but nothing has quite ever shown me the promise of what he reached out with Marriage Story. Do you know an actor that came to my mind when I thought about this. It's not my official answer, but I just thought we don't shout this actor out enough. Is Jared Harris.
Oh, yes.
Who is phenomenal, not actually getting that big in film roles, but Mad Men, The Crown, The Terror, Chernobyl. A fantastic actor. Genuinely, when I see Jared Harris attached to something, I think brilliant.
And I think could be wrongly accused of not being versatile, but you just mentioned all of those things. He can do a load of very interesting different stuff. He's not just like a slightly posh, squirrely guy. No, he's a very interesting actor.
And if you've seen Mad Men, you know he can do real vulnerability, and if you've seen, and particularly with Chernobyl as well, but he can also do, you know, terror, imposing stuff. Oh, it's terrific. I hadn't even thought about this actor until you just said Jesse Plemons reminded me that Jessie Buckley is an actor I absolutely adore. I adore everything she does, and I cannot wait next year. There's a film with her and Christian Bale, also an actor who's fantastic. Brilliant, yeah. In Maggie Gyllenhaal's Bride of Frankenstein movie.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So I can't wait to see that. All shot in black and white, looks fantastic. But my honourable mention, which was going to be, basically I have an anecdote which actually perfectly fits for today's answer. So my answer was going to be Coleman Domingo, who I love. And we talked about Sing Sing 2 weeks ago, and I loved that film, and I loved his performance in it. And I'm actually a bit surprised that we haven't had that much correspondence from people on Sing Sing. We had a couple of emails, a couple of people have talked about it, but it has really kind of come and gone. And I saw an interesting discussion online about the fact that A24 have Sing Sing, but they've also purchased so many other Oscar contender films for this year. Hello, there's a pigeon walking by.
Just going to walk into frame,
inquisitively just going by. That's fine. So A24 have purchased The Brutalist. They've purchased a Nicole Kidman movie. Hello, Mr. Pigeon. Here he goes. And so they've got all these contenders, and it feels like Sing Sing's been put on the back burner a little bit.
But anecdotally, friends of mine have gone, they've asked me what's good out right now. And I go, oh, Sing Sing's really good, you should check it out. And they're like, oh, what's that? I've not heard of it, which is always quite an interesting barometer for sort of marketing and where the rest of the people are
I'm hoping it has a second wind on streaming. But when I saw that, again, I said, I think Coleman Domingo is fantastic. He's great in Euphoria. What I love about Coleman Domingo is that he has this kind of wisdom to him, this very, very emotional wisdom to him. You know, it will never happen because of the themes of this play, but he would be great as Atticus Finch. He has that kind of wisdom of Atticus Finch because of the topic of it would never work
unless it's a very interesting,
unless it's a very sort of inverted kind of racial inverted show, or play. But he has that kind of wisdom to him, and I love it. He's got a fantastic voice, and I love everything about him on his presence. However. No, go on.
I was going to say his demeanor really he would have slotted into a film like Moonlight perfectly, like talking about like masculinity and vulnerability specifically from a black perspective. You could really imagine him in any of those scenes, like in a Mahershala Ali role. He's also brilliant, by the way.
Oh yeah, Mahershala Ali, fantastic. So I would say Coleman Domingo. However, funny enough, my opinion was beaten last week by something. So my answer for my favourite actor working today is now Jodie Comer. Because what I've realised about Jodie Comer is she has been in a few things on TV, she's been great on stage, and yet she still hasn't, I feel like she hasn't got her flowers yet in film. Last week I went to see Prima Facie on the big screen.
Nice,
so for those who don't know, Jodie Comer was in this one-woman show on the West End about 2 years ago called Prima Facie. It's all about a barrister dealing with a sexual assault case, and it's completely her own performance. And you know, these things are sometimes filmed and then you can watch in the cinema. So I went to see it last week, and you know what's funny is last week on Double Take, or a few weeks ago, I talked about Jenna Rowlands passing away and how she gave like one of the best screen performances of all time in A Woman Under the Influence. And I watched Jodie Comer last week in Prima Facie, and I thought, oh my God, fantastic. Like, what?
Oh my God.
I know, but it was. I was like, oh my God, what a performer. And the world just needs to watch out. I don't think the world has even seen what Jodie Comer can do yet. She's that good. So we in England, you know, in the UK, we've seen how great she is. You know, Killing Eve, that stuff on TV. And obviously she did the play in London. She's done The Last Duel, and she did Free Guy, and she did the Bike Riders this year as well. But I don't think she's had her time yet. I think she is phenomenal. I really did. And I know it's a bit of an unfair answer because that's a stage production. I know we're talking about film. But I do think that she's a phenomenal actor. I think she could go on to be like the British Meryl Streep.
Yeah, no, please go check out The Last Duel for a very interesting performance from Jodie Comer and Adam Driver. The End We Start From, which is a film nobody saw or really talked about, which I actually kind of liked for being sort of a very minimalist take on the apocalypse. But she elevates that film with a really interesting and subtle and delicate performance that otherwise in lesser hands might not have brought the film up to sort of a better than average offering. So yeah, I totally agree. She's really, really brilliant.
And her performance in Prima Facie was like, it reminded me of the athleticism of acting and seeing her become different characters on stage and switch around in a way that was just effortless and sublime. I thought it was a phenomenal performer. Funny anecdote just to end that, by the way.
Yeah.
I was watching Prima Facie. I'm watching it. It's getting toward. I'm in the closing 30 seconds of this play. Very emotional, very profound ending. And I'm watching it, and I just see a little movement out the corner of my eye. And I'm like, oh, is that a reflection of her putting something up on the screen by my side? And I glance down, and I see the movement again. And I was like, was that a spider? No, it was a mouse running right by my arm, right at the end of this play in the cinema. And I'm just sort of then stuck because I'm like, well, the thing's about to end, but there's been a mouse right there. And you feel like, should I move? But you don't want to cause a scene. But
see
like,
a lot of mice in cinema.
Right there.
Yeah.
Grim.
All the free popcorn.
Grim.
But yeah, just coming back to yours, like with Adam Driver, it's like I totally agree, and he's in that list. But ultimately, you're as good as your last few performances, and I feel like it's a bit of a raffle. But yeah, you like a film like Ferrari. You can check out our review, but we really weren't that impressed with Ferrari. It was sort of actually quite boring and not really that interesting as a story. But he nonetheless is really good in it.
Yeah,
and he's really going for it, and it's even though he's slightly lost in prosthetic. I'm still like, you are really, really good. And I think the only reason I saw that film was because Adam Driver was in it, because the reception before it came out wasn't great.
But you know what I find interesting is that, like, Megalopolis, Ferrari, they're quite grand performances. And, like, 65's not a grand performance, but it's built in with a genre. I would love him, like Marriage Story, come back down to earth, give a naturalistic performance in a kind of more normal, natural, everyday type of film. A more indie-spirited. Adam Driver cut his teeth on indie movies. And
Realism,
Girls was very indie-spirited. He's in a lot of Noah Baumbach films, and I would love to see him get back to, because I think when his true performance comes through, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, he's good in White Noise, which is a film I just didn't really click with. But no one saw that film.
So, do you want to hear what the people's answers are?
Just before you do.
Oh, because we've lost the sunlight. I'll just say, do you want the people's answers? Would you like the people's answers?
I'd love them.
So, I'm
Sorry, I'm so sorry, because you're just a little bit high in the shot. So can you either come a bit further down the hill? That's because I'm worried about your... Yeah, that's it. There you go. Just the socials, you might be a bit high on the shot. As you are.
Just gonna get that leg out there.
Oh, the sun's going to fucking come out now, isn't it?
Are we okay? Do you want
Yeah, it's fine. Actually. As you are.
Would you like to know what the people have gone for?
I would love to.
Number one, I think the most common name to come up, and would have been in my answers as well, had it not been everyone else had also suggested it, Saoirse Ronan.
Yeah.
Terrific, phenomenal actor, who I didn't realise is married to Jack Lowden, who's another good actor. Do you know Jack Lowden?
Oh, yeah, I think that.
I didn't realise they're husband and wife. Good for them. What a great acting duo.
Already has had a long career for her age. And
Exactly.
has been in a lot of very good films. I could imagine her cut 60 years down the line to be like a sort of Dame Judi Dench, Maggie Smith caliber of a long, very highly regarded suite of films that she's been in. Phenomenal
Actor. Rosamund Pike came up a few times, and I think she's an underrated actor.
Yeah, 100%.
I think that, we've always known her to be good, and then international audiences really got to know her through Gone Girl, where she was fantastic. And
James Bond as well. She would have been knocked out
but that was her first. That was her first film. But I feel like she then. Like after that, international audiences wouldn't have got to know her in anything else. I think Homegrown we did, but like, I still feel like she deserves more of a post Gone Girl follow up that isn't just playing difficult women. Different.
Yes. In Saltburn, arguably, she's kind of playing a bit of a stereotype.
Very
well.
Ice Queen, and like she was in that movie I Care a Lot, which is not great, but she won an Emmy for it. Not an Emmy, a Golden Globe, I believe. But like, I still think she's fantastic. She could be given more.
She'd be a great sort of Wicked Witch of Narnia type if we were typecasting her.
Yeah. Oh my god!
Do you know what I mean? She'd be great.
I felt like she was in it, but like she wasn't. But like she would
still,
totally fit as the Ice Queen in Greta Gerwig's.
Yeah.
So funny, getting away from being icy women just to play the iciest.
Play her the iciest woman.
Stephen Graham, a terrific actor who we love, British actor.
His Oscars is in the oven, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if he's ever going to be, because Stephen Graham is ultimately a character actor. He's not a leading man. He can't be the lead in things, but he's like an Eddie Marzan, who's another actor I actually always love.
Yeah, we've talked about him a lot.
Eddie Marzan's great, but like Stephen Graham is he is a proper actor's actor. He's not. He's not in the industrial complex of
no. He feels
movie
adjacent
making
to it, but is very much appreciated. But I feel like he's done so much great work with great filmmakers and actors. I feel like it's this slow, dark horse simmer that's percolating.
Yeah,
and the right role at the right time. Maybe the role that he was discussing in that cafe that one day when we were sat next to him. Again, like all of these actors, you're just one great The Whale role away from getting completely blasted back into the conversation.
And I think it's like also, particularly if you're an actor like Stephen Graham, if you do enough years of enough good work, it's like building up like a tinderbox that when the right role comes along, as you just said, it lights it and suddenly you're rocketed into the spotlight.
Yeah, and then people remember that great scene you had with Al Pacino in Scorsese's not Godfather, the Irishman.
The Irishman. A lot of people obviously said Timothy Chalamet and Paul Mescal and Cillian Murphy, which I think like it's almost like a moot point because he's won an Oscar now. But it is true that Cillian Murphy is also someone who's really straddled that line between being a leading actor and a character actor.
Yeah.
He was a
great
great
pick for this conversation 2 years ago.
Yes, 2 years ago we would have said, oh yeah, of course Cillian Murphy. And Cillian Murphy is a great actor and he's one of the best actors working today. But it's like he has successfully accomplished the fact he gets great, very, very interesting roles. He's a very private man. He doesn't play the game. He's not a leading man in that respect.
No, we would never
won the
have
Oscar.
put him as a leading man. We would have put him as a really interesting part of other people's great films.
He's that thing, classic actor. Like he's just doing his roles, keeping his head down, and then when the role came along, which was Oppenheimer, he stepped up and he absolutely nailed it. What a performance! So that was question number one. Are you ready for question number two, James? Question number two was. I feel like we're back at the pub quiz. Question number two, for 2 points. What film franchise is overrated?
Yeah, I've got two answers for this. Do you know what film franchise I think is really overrated? The Hunger Games. I think there's one okay film. People might say that film is great. Is it? I'm really sure it's actually kind of okay. My problem with this franchise is that it is always insisting to me that it's much more interesting than I think it actually is. That when you actually start to unpack that franchise and get into the nitty-gritty and trying to sort of solve the plot problems that it lays out, turns out there's actually very little interesting about it. I hear the books are a lot better. I think the only way my interest could be properly renewed in this whole Hunger Games saga is, and I hate to say this, you probably reboot it, remake the first one, but make it violent, make it nasty.
That's
really let me understand the bones and the structure of this dystopian dictatorship, because I never really got the sense of understanding why this all existed in the films. I think the sequel Catching Fire is basically the same film with a little bit more tension and budget, and then I thought the rest of them were just really poor. I absolutely hated The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I thought it was one of the most boring, overstuffed, and long, torturous film experiences I've had in a really long time. I absolutely just never really got interested in it. I think the reason it was a little bit teenage and sanitized is because the time when Hunger Games came out, we were peak teen dystopia. We had the Maze Runner, the Divergent series. Harry Potter was coming to its end, and that was very much the teenagers know better. We're going to rebel against the nasty wizards. And I wonder if in that landscape, the best way for that franchise to make money was to embrace that. And I'm just thinking we are probably going to get more Hunger Games, and I'm just really not into it. And I think people talk about the world and the characters, and I'm sorry, I've never been convinced. But I'm open to I'm open to a reboot, actually, of all things.
Yes, I basically agree. I've only seen the first two. And
don't bother with anything else.
I feel like I know where to call it with a franchise, and I think I called it at the right time.
I wouldn't bother with anything else. The cliffhanger at the end of 2 is fun, but the third act, the whole like part 1, part 2 Mockingjay was absolutely dull beyond belief.
You said you had another one.
I do have another one, and this might be a little bit controversial, but I think an overrated franchise is the Bourne franchise. Now, just give me a sec. Look, I perfectly understand that the Jason Bourne films injected this new, shaky cam, authentic, gritty lease of life into action films, which you can see the DNA of that in Craig's Bond films, John Wick, Taken, like all of that owes a massive debt to Jason Bourne. And but ultimately, I think when you watch these films back, which I haven't for a long time, I think there's something now a little bit stale and a little bit corporate and a little bit dry about those films. I know that sort of like the Bourne Legacy and Jason Bourne 2013 or 2014 came out, wasn't sort of the rejuvenation I think that franchise wanted, but I think it is so highly revered and so well regarded. I wonder if we're actually getting a little bit too excited about some very, very solid films from the early noughties. I don't get me wrong, I think we owe a lot of debt to Jason Bourne and like Paul Greengrass really injecting it later in the series with that massive epic scale, but I think we're just getting a little bit too excited. I'm going to go with Jason Bourne.
Fair enough. Well, similarly, the movie franchise that I think is completely overrated is James Bond.
Yeah, okay.
Now,
this I can totally see.
This is a bit of a slightly personal take, because I understand kind of where it sits, and that no one is saying that the James Bond movies are great, cinema. They're serviceable action things. They're very iconic. I get that. But my issue with James Bond is it's the type of people that it kind of brings out of the woodwork who are like, just head over heels with James Bond. They're like, oh my God, I love him. His car, his watch, his cologne.
Shallow, isn't it?
And I know we began this episode by like falling over Pierce Brosnan, but that's completely different. My issue is
we talked about his clothes and his car.
I know. No, but it's like there's something about people get excited every time a Bond movie comes out, and they're like, oh, the gadgets and the things, and it reminds me of people like, it's like men are getting really excited about a very high budget, very attractive version of Top Gear.
Yeah,
that's how they're treating James Bond, and that I find really icky. I just and I also find James Bond as a character pretty dull. I find him pretty. He's very, very problematic in many ways, but also I just find him quite dull. He's very terse and dry, and I'm like, I'm not asking him to be quippy, but I wouldn't want to hang out with him. I find it, silly and boring and a bit annoying. And he can do this with his watch and stuff, but. I have a certain nostalgia for certain Bond films. Don't get me wrong, I actually really like GoldenEye and all that era. But I think as a franchise, when people say to me, there's a new Bond movie coming out next year, or do you know, guess who's the new Bond's going to be? I don't care. I don't care. I only appreciate the James Bond one film at a time as a vehicle for the latest in action and kind of directing. I'm more interested in who's going to direct it,
with great
and
talent
what actors get. What talent gets a springboard out of it.
I think this is totally fair, because I think, what I think has happened in the last, call it 10 to 15 years culturally, especially amongst our generation, is that this image of the wandering, traveling businessman that James Bond is really like the icon of has sort of become slightly people have kind of got the ick for that style of like, yes, I wander and I sleep around with lots of different women and I'm a man of no name and no number. That is actually kind of seen as like slightly problematic, weird behavior that back in the day, that Don Draper, that 60s, 70s wandering man was like the perfect idea of what it was to be cool. He has a sports car and he dresses in only the best clothes. Whereas now I don't think culturally we recognize that as something to be admired, or like violence for the sake of it and womanizing. And
also I think like in a way that the Mission Impossible films have shown that like it's never one guy, it's always a team effort, like at least the Mission Impossible films show that it's a team effort. James Bond doing it all himself, and like I admire them for always trying to deconstruct it and make it into the modern day, but ultimately I don't find the idea of James Bond personally very attractive. I've never been attracted to that type of man in like the way in his viewpoint in the world and what he represents. I find it a little bit icky.
So I do inherently disagree. I 100% see your point, but I do get excited by James Bond ultimately, and there are select films I really do regard well, and I think they're very interesting. And I see your point about the character being slightly dry, but it's when that is confronted and challenged that ultimately I can get very excited. Like Skyfall in particular addresses that very well, and there are elements of Spectre like asking about why the man behind the gun needs to exist in the first place. I'm like, I see the bare bones, and I think it's very interesting. On your point, I think the best thing for James Bond to do is to reboot it. You go back to the 1950s, 1960s Cold War, and you remake those original films, but with all the you basically like reset what it meant to be Bond, but through our modern lens.
Like The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Guy Ritchie's movie. Do you remember that with Henry Cavill?
I do. Let's be honest, guys. We want the Oppenheimer-style Christopher Nolan reboot shot on IMAX 70mm of James Bond doing Casino Royale or Dr. No back in the depths of the Cold War. You make it period, you give it $1 trillion of budget, and you just go, I hear Nolan's out. But I hear you, I think that's fair.
Please don't misinterpret what I'm saying. I do still have time for James Bond. I don't hate James Bond. I don't dislike James Bond, but as a franchise, it's lower on the list for me to get excited about.
Can I just throw one more out there?
You may.
Very cheekily. And I'm not sure I'm going to back this, but in terms of film franchises being a little bit overrated, I'm going to say X-Men.
Interesting, yeah.
I think there's a lot of like excitement, especially now that it's all sort of re-emerging in the MCU, about X-Men. And then I'm looking at the X-Men films and I'm thinking, are these, at their best, are they just kind of okay? I think of the Bryan Singer ones, I think X-Men 2 is probably the most exciting one. And then of the sort of Matthew Vaughn reboot into the apocalypse, whatever, I'd say First Class is my favorite.
Yeah.
I think Days of Future Past is an interesting sequel, but never, that series, that sort of new reboot, never really felt cohesive and like it was going anywhere. It's like they got these great actors on a 3-picture deal or 4-picture deal, and they all wanted to make a bunch of money, but ultimately, everyone's like, X-Men, and I'm like, am I that excited about any one X-Men property in particular? Not really. I'm going to say it's maybe a little bit overrated.
So here are some movie franchises that people think are overrated. Jurassic Park, I would say that's a one-movie franchise. Same also with The Matrix. That's a one-movie franchise.
It's a franchise. Yes,
there
are.
Right. Don't get me wrong. I guess the chase and Reloaded is kind of interesting, but ultimately it's a one-movie franchise.
Like Matrix 1 is essential viewing for anyone, and then like the sequels are optional.
Yeah, they're very much.
Never say you need to finish the
side
story.
quests.
No.
The next one, which has come up a lot when we've asked people on Film Bites, which I think is actually true, is Terminator.
Yeah.
I just did a double thing on it on the Patreon about it, but I agree that, and having rewatched 1 and 2, that like 2 is great. 2 is a great film, and 1 is interesting but dated now, and it's like a 1.5 to 2 movie franchise. But like after that, it really doesn't lend itself anymore.
Friend of the show, Matt Bentley, even was like, Terminator 2 is great, and he was like, is it? Is it really?
It is.
I think
it is, Matt.
But he sort of, I think it was nice of him to ask the question in the first place.
Because I was like, when I watched Terminator 1 recently, I was thinking of like Looper, which is a film I really like. Looper is a better movie than Terminator 1. It's just that Terminator 1 came out before, naturally, so it set the course, so you have to be respectful.
Yeah.
But I think Terminator's an overrated franchise. Yeah. We also have Ghostbusters. That's what Benedict Townsend said on our Film Bites.
I feel like a lot of people are sort of. We've always been asked the question: who actually is waiting for Ghostbusters films? Who is this fan base that is being sort of banked upon to release these films? And we don't actually think the foundations are anything that strong.
People said Twilight, the MCU.
I'd say Twilight is appropriately ridiculed and rated.
And I feel like MCU is quite an easy one to say because there's so many films. It's quite easy out of the law of averages to pick out bad films.
I think they're rightfully criticised a lot. So to say, I think they're appropriately sort of cut down,
balanced
actually,
out.
and the sentiment even in their own films is that they're not doing a very good job right now.
And friend of the show, Adam Barlow, says
friend of the show,
he thinks Harry Potter is overrated, which is 2 takes we've had recently on Film Bites. And he says, surprisingly, he's fond of Fantastic Beasts, which I just think is incorrect.
Sorry, Adam, all of a sudden I'm questioning everything you have to say. But we had a lot of people, more than happy to hear their point, say that Harry Potter is overrated. And as a huge Harry Potter fan, my rebuttal to that is that actually Harry Potter has always been appropriately criticised for having slightly dodgy younger actors, for some of the dialogue to be a little bit wonky, for like copious amounts of plot holes, especially relating to time travel and very useful plot devices sort of coming in and out of the plot. Problematic uses of just magic and then abandoning that magic later. I've always felt like those films have been rightfully criticised, but once the last films came out and the dust settled on the franchise as a whole, lots of millennials really rediscovered them as wonderful autumnal hangover films. Like uni kids would watch them together, and they have a very special place in people's heart despite their flaws. And so I always think it's one of the biggest entertainment IPs of all time. And the new films have sort of set the precedent that the originals were amazing and we're making more. I'm like, no, they've always kind of been a bit wonky, but we love them anyway. So I just sort of say that. The books I won't hear about. We're talking just about the films. The books are brilliant. The films in particular, I would say, you got a little wasp there.
I'm all right.
Oh, yeah. What is it?
All right.
It's a wasp. But books separately, just the films. I think they have been appropriately criticised and sort of painted as whatever you might think that they are. So I'll just say that in defence.
That was question number 2.
Loved it. Yeah, sure. So George, question 3, moving on now, is what movie makes you cry?
Brokeback Mountain. Like a baby. I think I've spoken a little bit about it on the show before.
Underrated.
It is. Funny enough, Brokeback Mountain is underrated because it's rated by the right people, but it's also underappreciated for how it's one of the best love stories of cinema in the past 20 years. It's not just this sort of, as people glibly put it, the gay cowboy movie. Crying with Brokeback Mountain is not just a little tear. I husked myself out. I dried myself. I dehydrated myself with the amount of crying I did. And I cried, and then I stopped, and I'd be like, yeah, I'm fine. And then it was a full body experience. It's the most I've ever cried. I think that film is a beautiful film, very profound. And what I love is the structure. You have this first half, which is completely set to one location, Brokeback Mountain, over the course of one summer, basically just Jake Gyllenhaal and Heath Ledger on the mountain. And then you get this second half, which is cutting through the years at great pace. It's a wonderful contrast. I think Ang Lee directs it with great sensitivity. The performances are wonderful. There are so many people in that movie you forget are in it. Kate Mara, David Harbour, Anna Faris. Yeah. It's really beautiful. And, it builds towards this ending that is so well delivered, I think, actually, and pitched just right. And the sort of moments of delicacy in the closing minutes are wonderful, and the score, and it ends with this Willie Nelson track saying he was a friend of mine, and my God, really gets me right there. I'm very proud to say I cry at that movie because I think it's just so beautiful. And if you haven't seen Brokeback Mountain, you've got to. It's a must watch. It's essential viewing.
I'm really glad to say that we feel like it's aging really well as a film, and specifically like a gay film from that era. It would have been very easy for that to not have quite got how to tell that story in the right way. But I think looking back on it, you're like, no, this isn't just necessarily about gay romance. It's a fantastic romance film first.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think for a long time, it was slightly sneered at and a bit of the butt of the joke. It's like, oh, what, you're going to watch Brokeback Mountain? Yeah. And I think it sort of got a little bit lost in its own bubble of being a bit like the meme, but actually once years later now we strip all that away and you go back and appreciate this film for what it is. It really has aged like a fine wine, and it's an absolutely fantastic watch.
And I think that's because younger generations who aren't prejudiced in the same way, thankfully, and have been brought up in a much more open-minded way, are able to fully experience it as you should. I mean, I didn't see it until I was like in my 20s, so
sort of uni.
Yeah, so it's much older, but at the time, I mean, I think it's funny, it was made in 2005, which simultaneously feels quite recent, but also is actually quite a long time ago. Things have changed a lot, thankfully. And it was a really, the noughties was such a, sexist, homophobic, laddie culture still, particularly
really
in the UK with the media. And like that whole era now, when you look back at it, is really icky. And like
British media and tabloid and television in particular.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting, it's just separately tangent about, it's the documentary about Jade Goody and her treatment in the media, which is a really wonderful time capsule of what our British media was like in that era. And we're both too young to actually probably get a sense for what it was like. But go and check that out, and it's sort of reflective of where values were, especially in relating to like sex and gender and identity and all those kinds of things. It's very, very different time not that long ago.
And also the and also very serious is the documentary that came out last year about Russell Brand. Yeah, if you have not seen it, seeing TV culture in the noughties back then was horrific. And like it's funny because we all remember it, but it was like brainwashing. It was just on the whole time. And now you look back at it, you think, oh my God.
Tangent, but like reality stars were a new phenomenon at the time, and it was almost like they had no respect and could be the butt of the joke because our proper celebrities had a sort of sense of prestige and that they'd earned their fame, and the reality stars we subjected to ridicule and embarrassment. It was almost like, well, they don't count because they chose to do this show and therefore they're not as important or don't matter. And it's just really, really horrifying to see how we used to treat people on screen. Go and check out those two docs if you haven't already.
But other than that, Brokeback Mountain, if you haven't seen it yet, just forget everything you know about it. Go and watch it. And if you haven't seen it in a long time, rewatch it, because that massive cry I had was after the second time of watching it. What a gut punch. Go and see it.
I have a couple of options to this, but do you want to know what movie really makes me cry?
Go on.
12 Years a Slave. That's in particular, specifically the very last scene when he is reunited with his family at the end. And what Steve McQueen is so brilliant at understanding about that story is that he always is in service of telling the story to its truest form. And there's so many moments where he doesn't let the setting or the character dynamics or anything else get in the way of proper storytelling. And when that moment does arrive, after the fact that it's been 12 years and he's reunited with his family and he's barely able to put a sentence together, and the incredible performance by Chiwetel Ejiofor, the tears are streaming down his face, and he apologizes to his family for being late to all the moments. And I just think that film is such a wonderful piece of storytelling. He's so good at sort of not moving the camera, letting the moments of horror contrasted with beauty reveal themselves. It's got incredible performances, and that movie with an amazing Hans Zimmer score, all those perfect ingredients just come together, and it makes me weep every single time. It's a brilliant film.
It's a fantastic film, and do you know what the kind of the word that sticks out for me about 12 Years a Slave is dignity.
Yes,
I think Steve McQueen has got a great eye for dignity. Not only does he treat and the kind of the lens of the camera, the eye of the camera is treating its subject with great dignity, but then also, like as you say, like Solomon as a character is trying to always hold dignity within himself, even in the most awful circumstances, and very stoic. And there is that kind of trying to be dignified and graceful in that ending, even though he's just, he's been 12 years a slave.
Yeah.
It's a really sensitive piece of work. And actually, just on Steve McQueen as well. So he's got a new film coming out, I think called Blitz, which is premiering at London Film Festival with Saoirse Ronan in it. And I'm really interested to see it because I think Steve McQueen is an incredibly talented man. And you've got to remember, he started as an artist. He was Turner Prize-winning artist, then kind of segued into filmmaking, then has done other things as well. And he's only made 4. He's made 4. No, he's 5. Sorry, Hunger,
Widows,
Shame,
12 Years a Slave.
So Hunger, Shame, and 12 Years a Slave are all very interesting. Also, kind of always about dignity and very interesting character studies. And then he had a break, and then he came back with Widows, which was fine. I actually think not the best use of Steve McQueen's talent. I actually think that story would have been probably better told by a different, much slightly more genre-infused telling. He really kind of stripped it down and made it very cold. Fine, but not what people expected. And I think he could, I think it could be done a different way. And now he's come back with Blitz, but I'm looking for that very prestigious piece of Steve McQueen.
And I think Occupied City for him, it's a 4-hour. I've not seen. I wanted to check it out, but just the length of it, I think, sort of dawned to me slightly. It's a 4-hour documentary about Amsterdam and the Nazi occupation. It's like that really goes back to his roots as sort of like art piece filmmaking. Like I'm going to make something that could almost stand as its own museum piece. Yeah. And I think that's a little wonderful, like really intense, long, epic palette cleanser artistically. And I'm also excited to see his new film Blitz because I love Shame. I think it's one of my underrated picks for later. But yeah.
So
sorry. Before you move on, I just wanted to say the opening of Up, like Bambi, it has this. Wonderful, like the gut punch comes at the very beginning and then it wonderfully cheers up later and then it brings it right back round at the end. The opening of Up and that track is used so much on social media to evoke sadness for a reason. That opening scene about regrets and lives not being lived to the fullest and missed opportunities just will get anyone who's ever lived a life, man.
The 3 most overused, not comment on the cinema, but like 3 most overused movie tracks on TikTok are that. It's the What Was I Made For from Barbie.
Yes,
and it's the Interstellar
Caulfield
track.
Chase. Yeah.
I will just say, so here are the ones that the people have said.
Oh yes.
So many, and I've tried to actually pick the more different ones because I think we know kind of the regular ones, the Marleys and Me's and all that stuff. Yeah. So someone put P.S. I Love You, not a film I've seen. After Sun, yes, I can totally see that. My girlfriend found that very, very moving. Billy Elliot.
Yeah.
Wow. Right. God. I mean, I was talking to someone at your birthday party about it because it's one of his favourite films. I mean, a bit of minor spoiler, but at the end, when it cuts forward to the future, Swan Lake.
Huge.
And in the audience, my goodness, what a movie. Somebody said Everything Everywhere All at Once, which I don't associate as a movie being particularly moving, but I can see that. It has heart.
Yeah.
We have...
Swiss Army Man. Thinking of the Daniel... Yeah.
Really? Makes you cry?
Very thought-provoking and emotionally stirring. Yeah, I don't know if it made me cry, but Dark Horse.
Dark Horse. Somebody said anything directed by Clint Eastwood, which I think is a rogue shout. I'm not saying he doesn't have any sort of emotional intensity, but I don't associate with his... I don't think I associate emotional impact necessarily with Clint Eastwood movies. Right. Frozen 2, someone said.
Rubbish.
More than a few people said The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which I've not seen.
It's sad. Is
it sad?
Hunchback of Notre Dame, rewatched it this year. What the hell were they thinking? Sorry. In what world is that an appropriate story? I get we turn dark stories into Disney films quite a lot. What the hell were you thinking? I've never seen it. So. Listen to some of the track. I'm like, this is horrendously inappropriate. It's about like, I can't get into it, but there's a song that's like, if this gypsy doesn't sleep with me, I'll burn her in front of Paris. That is essentially, it's so terrible. And I love watching Disney stuff all the time, but I rewatched this, like, this is so wildly inappropriate.
Oh my God.
Honestly.
Couple more. We have About Time, regular one. Lion King, regular one. Somebody said any film in which a dog dies. Yep. And Toy Story 3.
Yeah, Toy Story 3. It was a very popular pick for a lot of people.
Both for the fear of the furnace scene, but also the great closing of Bonnie, Andy going.
Yes.
That's a great... It's a great 1-2 punch.
There's that wonderful moment where the score coming in, they're like, do you got a friend in me in the beginning? And it's like, our friendship will never die. And it just has the reverb because the friendship has died. Very good. But the reason why Toy Story 3 really gets you is I genuinely thought for a minute, the first time I saw it, I was like, oh my God, they're going to kill them. Yeah. It actually had me for a brief minute thinking they're not going to make it. They're going to, and obviously they do sort of make it. But that really did, I did wonder if they were going to do it.
But the point is that scene is that they all believed they were going to go.
Yeah.
And they, in that final moment, they all had an emotional truth with them when they all bonded and they all held each other's. It's quite existential, really.
I'm going to give a shout out to the ending of The Pursuit of Happiness.
Never seen it.
Oh, okay, so
But I'm sure I know what happens.
yeah,
I'm sure it's happy.
There's
happy tears.
Minor spoilers. He gets the job, right? I think
I've seen it on TikTok.
Right?
Yeah.
He gets the job, and it's wonderful. I like to put it in there because it's a happy tears moment of this amazing catharsis of someone who's worked and struggled, and in the moment where he should fail, where he turns up to this meeting dressed in a way that he looks like he's just paying his flat, but when that moment when he realizes he is one of the people and gets to work and live with dignity amongst everyone else, and Will Smith really does the performance well, and he sort of claps himself away. I was like, that is a really wonderful, happy cry at the end of that film.
Obviously, It's a Wonderful Life. I'd also like to give a shout out to Coco, which would have been my answer pre-Brokeback Mountain. The thing about Coco, which I don't think I've ever talked about, which is that obviously it's very emotional, but anyone who knows Coco, that a real emotional gut punch happens at the end, towards the end, with Coco has to sing a song to his grandmother who's got Alzheimer's from the film. And the thing is that I didn't know what to expect from Coco at all. I just knew it was a Pixar film when Anna and I just put it on a few years ago. My nana died about 3 months before, and Anna's grandma was that year suffering quite greatly from Alzheimer's. So we had but we didn't know what the film was about at all. So that scene comes in, and it was like a truck just bulldozing through the. You know what?
That's quite smart.
We're a mess.
That's quite a smart thing for Pixar to tackle. Is that's actually probably a very common lived experience for a lot of children who obviously might not have the very intricate details of a degenerative brain disease explained to them, but nonetheless will have experienced a family member forgetting things about them and not able to connect with them in the same way. So that film being brave enough to actually articulate a thing that lots of children would have experienced and to do it well in a way that they can understand, I think is part of its genius. And Coco's it's a warning sign film. Warning. When you watch
I wonder if this is an overshare, but I think we can because we're all friends here. I want to talk about, this isn't actually my story, this is my dad's story, and I think it's really important because it's about how films connect with us. Is that I watched, have you ever seen the Robert Downey Jr., Richard Attenborough movie Chaplin? From 1990.
No, but I've heard great things.
Robert Downey Jr. plays Charlie Chaplin. It's a Charlie Chaplin biopic. It's quite an interesting film. There's a lot of famous people in it, and it's a bit dated now. It's quite old-fashioned, but Robert Downey Jr. gives a very good performance in it. But a lot of the film takes place in the early 1900s in London, in the East End, and there's lots of sort of East End lingo. And we watched that movie, and I'm oversharing a personal story here, but we finished it, and then a few minutes later, I went into the kitchen, I found my dad, and my dad was crying. My dad was in tears. And I was like, oh, are you okay? What's wrong? And basically, my dad's nan was from the East End a lot. She was from Deptford. Southeast. But she spoke like proper London, And she had been moved out of London when she was like 10 years old. But she loved London. She would always go back up. And like, she spoke exactly like those characters did at the beginning of Chaplin. And it just brought everything back up to the surface for my dad, and it completely reconnected him with someone who he hadn't seen for 30, 40 years. And it was sad, but it was also kind of beautiful because it's a way of like invoking someone and bringing them back in a completely adjacent way. That I just thought it was really beautiful. So that's really nice. Yeah.
Next, moving on, George, away from sad times, hopefully to more happier ones. Best movie to see on a date.
Well,
we think it's sort of like first date, early dates.
I think so.
Because I think when you sort of, someone asking this question, I think is choosing a film for someone they're not too familiar with, but they want to get this right.
So I think that there are lots of answers to this that I would actually advise against. A lot of people suggested, someone for example suggests Before Sunrise. I'd say not a great date night movie because it's a very intense experience of these two people. My initial answer was going to be School of Rock, right? Because on the one hand, it's not romantic, so there's no relationship pressure put upon you in watching it. Also, if you go on a date with someone and they don't like School of Rock,
what are you doing?
Huge red flag.
Filter them out early.
Who doesn't like School of Rock? I mean, that's insane. However,
it's tacky,
I thought about it a bit longer, and I was like, it is tacky. Yeah. But I thought a bit longer, and I was like, no, let's think of an actual film that has a bit of romance in it. And I think the best date night movie is Dirty Dancing.
Okay, yeah, great.
We talked about Dirty Dancing before.
Lovely.
Iconic film, great, but it's so much better than you actually think about it. And it's so much better than you actually think it is. And the reason I think it's a great date night movie is that, obviously, most women I meet love Dirty Dancing in it, and it's amazing. Most guys haven't seen it because they think it's a certain type of film, but it's actually so much better. And you had this when you watched it this year. That film is, yes,
it's sexy as well.
It is sexy. It's stylish, and yes, it's in the 80s, but like, it still has set made in the 80s, set in the 50s, 60s. But it's got a really interesting storyline about unplanned pregnancies and the need for safe, legal abortions. And it has an interesting thread about anti-Semitism in it, about class. And the film is offering you more than you think it is. I like the fact it's quite simple. It has a great climax, but which basically just takes place in one room with just everyone there. It's quite simple in that respect. Swayze is sexy. The chemistry is sexy. The look of it is sexy. It's also the most rewatchable film of all time. And I think if you go and watch that with someone on a date, it's a really great experience. But also, like, in my head, I've just used an example of like me, like a man and a woman on a date. But like for anyone, I think that if you split most people down the middle, 50% of them have seen Dirty Dancing, 50% of them haven't, or think of it as a different film. So I think it's just a good shout.
So when I started thinking about this question, the more I thought about the typical answers, I thought the more romantic and typical you go, actually the more cringy and try hard I think you're going to come across. So I actually think for a date night, it's quite good to contrast the romance with something horrifying and sinister.
Great.
So I'm going to opt for It Follows. Right? Very sort of on the rails for a date, right? Because that opens with a very date. But I think, here's the thing. Everything I said about not wanting to go too far with romance is cool. It Follows, a film that most people haven't seen, but is a very interesting concept that is good to discuss with a new person, and it builds up conversation. It's scary, so you've got the cozy factor there, and it's very interesting, and I think you'll sound like you sort of know a little bit about your films when you put it on. Similarly, Get Out. Like, put it on. Like, I'll start a conversation. The scary, the horrifying. Contrast the romance with something dark and sinister.
Yeah.
It's perfect. Yeah. And then if I was to go down that more romantic route, I would go for a subtle Paul Bettany, Kirsten Dunst, Wimbledon.
Yeah, you've already said this before.
Great film, very easy to watch. Sam Neill in there, James McAvoy in there.
Sam Neill's in there. Sam Neill.
He's the sort of pushy father of Kirsten Dunst, who's trying to get her to play the best tennis. That film is wonderfully charming, wonderfully British, has a real great feel-good factor, and I think that is a very easy watch on a date where, listen, if you're not really concentrating, you can still follow it through all the way to the end.
Is something like Challengers a good movie for a date night? Is it too try hard because it's so sexy?
I think you're just on the edge of try hard, but I'd like it on a date. But I wonder if it's a bit...
Because it's not actually a sex scene in it, really.
No.
It's quite slightly sexless, but there is sex in it, but it's not actually like a sex
Not
scene.
for the first 3 or 4 dates. I think down the line.
Down the line.
You put that on. And then About Time, I think, is a really great shout if you want to go for that.
If you want to look further ahead to the future.
Yes.
So the one that was a suggestion. Well, actually, sorry. Also, I say that I did see Sing Sing on a date with Lana. Obviously, I've been in an 8.5-year relationship, it doesn't go. But like, I do think that's quite nice because it's a very moving, thoughtful, gives you something to discuss. And actually, on that point, just would you rather see a movie and then have dinner, or dinner then a movie?
With who?
Whom?
Talia.
Anyone, really, actually. Just say you've got...
For the sake of the conversation or for the sake of how I like my food?
No, just like, as a preference, someone's saying, we're going to have dinner and a movie tonight. Great. We're going to go out and do it. Great. We want to go to the cinema. Great. Would you rather the showtime be earlier, then you go for dinner? Or you have dinner,
I think
then you go
earlier film, then dinner.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
I want to discuss... I don't want to just sort of like filter out. I'd like to discuss it over a meal.
Yeah.
But there is something nice about having a full stomach and ordering a glass of Malbec and then watching a film.
But also, I think if the film sucks, you have the food to look forward to.
Yes.
You can cushion it out with the, well, that was terrible, let's have a glass of wine.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think I'd go, give me a 6:30 showing, come out 7:45, 8 o'clock, depending on the length of the film, if you're lucky.
A lateral suggestion, which I thought was quite good from someone online, was that Barbie is a good date night movie because it will tell you immediately about the other person, where they stand. Particularly in a heterosexual relationship, if you're a girl and you take a guy on a date to see Barbie, you want to know how he thinks about Barbie because, you don't have to love it, but it's like, it will tell you. It will tell you in a certain way. Any red flags will come up.
To this day, all the people I've spoken to who aren't close friends of mine or just meeting people at parties talk about, Barbenheimer. The people who haven't enjoyed Barbie saw it alone at home or on a plane and just
Yeah.
didn't get it.
Yeah.
And I hate to tell them, I'm just like, unfortunately, part of the experience that I think you missed was wearing pink, all of us going with the Barbenheimer weekend and experiencing that with a crowd and enjoying the satire together.
Yeah.
It's quite an annoying thing to say, and I sometimes don't. But a lot of the people who have said, I watched it on at home, and I didn't really get all the fuss was about. And I'm like, I'm sure you didn't.
Yeah, I'm sure you didn't. That's
It's
a
a very
cinema
it's a very
experience.
snobbish film bro thing to say, like, oh, you got to go see it in fucking IMAX. But yeah, kind of, it was a moment in time. Barbie.
Totally moment in time. And
But it's like Oppenheimer, obviously, a huge, large format presentation. I do think you can appreciate that fine piece of art nonetheless later down the line on a TV screen.
Some other suggestions from people, obviously the more conventional things like Crazy Stupid Love, 10 Things I Hate About
Yeah.
You, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. I think people are just sort of shouting rom-coms, but as we
Love How to
discussed,
Lose a Guy
they
in 10
don't
Days.
have to be rom-coms
Yeah.
for date nights. Someone say game night because it is romantic, but it's also primarily a comedy movie with a kind of mystery narrative. That's quite fun. That was all for a date night movie, but I think of all the answers I've given, that's the most fluid one. I'm sure if you asked me tomorrow, I could give a different answer.
Yeah, and then you're always going to read the person. You're always going to sense the vibe. How many dates have you had?
It does depend on the person.
Is
yeah.
it like a second date going to be they're coming over for the first time?
Do you just before we move on to our final question, a bit like I said with School of Rock, do you have any other red flag, not red flag, but any deal breaker films that if someone says they didn't like it, you'd be like, I'm not sure I can date you?
Oh, I'm sure. I'd say, not off the top of my head, but I bet I could think of deal breaker. If they liked, I wouldn't.
I think for me, like School of Rock and Shawshank.
I agree. But like, what you don't like, I mean, there are probably loads.
But like, because the kind of universe films that really, even if they open up your mind really wide and being really broadly thinking, you think, what didn't you like about those movies?
Yeah.
But there's always a contrarian out there.
Totally. Yeah, to be honest, there's probably loads.
Should we move on to our final question?
Let's do it. So lastly, George, a conversation that I think we're always endlessly having on our podcast about films that are underrated. And I think it's obviously subjective in terms of what you think is good, but it's also quite hard to put a pin in exactly what makes a film rated in the first place. Sometimes I feel like we're just judging that on a feeling, on the ever-ending conversation of film enthusiasts as a whole, whether or not something's had awards attention, whether or not the actors are famous. But this is about what film is underrated.
That's right. And I'm actually just going to give one answer because we could be here all day.
I've got loads.
Have you?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. I've only prepped one because I could go on, but touched on it throughout the years on the show. For me, a great underrated movie is The Perks of Being a Wallflower.
Yeah.
That film came out in 2011, and I think it was just. It came out at a time that I think people would much more appreciate it now. First of all, a phenomenal performance from Logan Lerman. I still don't think Logan Lerman is up for me like an underrated actor.
Yeah.
I still don't think Logan Lerman has like got the career he deserves off of the back of that performance. Really vulnerable, really uncomfortable, really twitchy, really shy. I love that. I actually think Emma Watson's performance is actually really good, and I think people were really, really harsh on her at the time.
Yeah.
This kind of post-Potter or just towards the end of Potter criticism of her. And actually what's happening with her character, like it makes sense for her to be like that. I think there's a lot in The Perks of Being a Wallflower about trauma and the way that is handled and the way that affects people that I think is so much more in the zeitgeist now and people would respond to so much better now than they did at the time. Great supporting cast. Paul Rudd's in there, Joan Cusack, Melanie Linsky. I think it's a really great film with a great soundtrack, and it's very rewatchable as well. I could really whack it on at any time. It's really good, and like it's not like top tier. Don't get me wrong, but I really feel like people were unfair on that film at the time, and I think it's got a lot of heart and deserves to be kept around.
Yeah, a great shout. Totally agree. Underrated films, there's quite a few I think we've mentioned on the show that I just want to give a shout out to. Films like Steve Jobs, 13 Lives, which we really appreciated.
Yeah, that was
which
underrated.
Is a really good
Yeah.
underrated film. It's the story of the Thai school football team who got stuck in the caves and they had a quick amount of time to get out before it flooded. Really well done. Joel Edgerton, Viggo Mortensen, just a really great cast telling that story really sensitively. And I can't recommend it enough. I've seen it twice now. I think it's really good. Master and Commander is a film that comes up a lot, like Peter Weir film with Russell Crowe, Paul Bettany, really underrated. X-Men First Class, I think, is one of the better X-Men films, doesn't get enough shout. So one of my picks for a film that is underrated, I don't think this film was perfect, but we've mentioned it funnily a couple of times today, and that's Peter Jackson's King Kong. Kong. And the reason I say this is because I think this is an underrated film.
All right.
Here's the thing, is that if you look at the Godzilla Kong films we're getting now, I think Peter Jackson's King Kong came out 15 years too early. And if that version of King Kong had come out now, it would actually be regarded as quite a half-decent, very entertaining film. I think it's probably a bit too long. I think there are a couple of CG sequences that maybe take a little bit too much time. But you've got a great cast. You've got Naomi Watts, Adrian Brody, Jack Black, Andy Serkis,
Jamie Bell,
Kyle Chandler, all actually giving very fun, blockbuster, big performances. And I think that film delivers on spectacle. There's actually something quite a great emotional gut punch that happens towards the end. I think the gorilla T-Rex fight is very entertaining. If we're going to hold it up next to Godzilla Kong, I think this is leaps above it.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to put that out there as a slightly controversial one. But my pick is a real favourite of mine, a film I've mentioned a few times on the podcast, and that's Nocturnal Animals.
Yeah.
I think this film's really underrated and underseen. A lot of people I mention it to haven't heard of it. Even a lot of people who really like their films and who like their Letterboxd exchanges sometimes haven't heard of Nocturnal Animals. Like I went on Henry, it's Scene Stealers podcast, peers of ours, Henry and Tobias Turley, and they hadn't heard of it. And I really gave it a big thumbs up. And I think it's a really interesting, overly dramatic film in the best way. Tom Ford, very interesting director. I really liked, he's sort of looking at the way he likes to shoot films. It's beautifully shot. It's got an incredible cast. You've got Jake Gyllenhaal, Amy Adams, Isla Fisher, Aaron Taylor-Johnson giving it absolutely... Michael Shannon. Aaron Taylor-Johnson completely explodes off the screen in that film. And it's about this person who's bumps into an old ex of theirs after they had a very sort of tumultuous breakup, and she receives a manuscript for a book that he's going to release about their relationship, and she's reading the book, and it's incredibly violent and dark and sinister, and it features a lot of death and loss, and she's reading the pages of this book, seeing a lot of parallels to their relationship, and a very similar look-alike with Amy Adams and Isla Fisher are playing versions of the same character. And there's this one just phenomenal scene with Aaron Taylor-Johnson on the side of a highway that is so wonderfully dramatic and intense, and then follows this sort of slow Western style murder mystery with Michael Shannon. I just think it's a really underrated, underseen film, and I can't wait to see what Tom Ford does next. Nocturnal Animals.
That's currently on Netflix UK for those who haven't seen it. Also, I believe you mentioned that when we talked about best movies of the 2010s.
Yes.
How many times have you seen it?
I've seen it twice, but actually not for a long time.
I think we should, because you've mentioned it a few times now, we should rewatch. I've only seen it once, and put a little, Patreon review of that
do a little Nocturnal Animals,
deep dive.
100%.
Well, actually, whilst you were doing that, because I felt bad that I only brought one, I've just gone onto a list on my phone. There's a director called, I have a few more from me. There's a director called Stephen Cohn, who has made, for me, two lovely, tiny, completely completely overlooked great movies. One called Henry Gamble's Birthday and one called Princess Sid. Just on Henry Gamble's Birthday, it's basically... a lot of his films touch on the overlap between sexuality and religion, and it's at this kid's birthday party. I think he's turning 21, and it's this all set at his house. It's like a pool party, but they're all friends from church, and all the kids are friends from church, all the parents are church-going people. And it's just sort of this overlap with some doubts and also some burgeoning sexuality. And it's very understated, but quite moving. It's very deft and delicate. And I just really loved it. And you know what? It was recommended to me because a friend of mine was just like, I was hungover and I watched this random film called Henry Gamble's Birthday Party. It's got Joe Keery in it before Stranger Things.
Right, okay.
And they were like, it was really good, actually. And because it was lockdown when I watched it, I just said, I've got time.
Yeah.
I've got time to watch this random film. And it was great. And I loved it as a random find. I will also give a shout out to A Most Violent Year, J.C. Chandler's movie from 2015 with Oscar Isaac and Jessica Chastain. It's sort of it's
frosty,
set in the 80s,
cold,
frosty, beautifully shot. Great. It's like a great Pacino. It's like discovering a great Al Pacino movie from the 80s, but it happens to have been made with Oscar Isaac in 2015. There's a great movie with Jude Law and Carrie Coon called The Nest, which I really recommend. And I was thinking about today. So this is a movie which is set in 1980s London, and it's this mystery of Jude Law's married an American woman, and he moves them in the 1980s back to London for this new job that he's got. But the reasons why are very mysterious and uncomfortable. And there's a scene where he goes to his office in 1980s London, and you get the skyline of London like it is behind us today, but it is the 1980s version. And it's just
nice.
And it's just in the background of this very drab office scene. It's just quite refreshing to see it depicted differently. But it's depicting the American dream in 80s yuppiedom in a very different way, in a very sort of sinister, almost ghost story-like way, but also it's just a really interesting film. I really love that, and I love Jude Law.
You know what I just thought about? A film that I don't know if a lot of people like, but me and Talia watched it and thought it was brilliant. It was Molly's Game with Jessica Chastain.
Never saw it.
I've watched it, put it on the TV, and it was so entertaining. It's an Aaron Sorkin script about this woman who ran this illegal, off-market, high-stakes poker game for celebrities and influential people. And I just thought it was absolutely gripping, and I really, really enjoyed it. So I just recommend that if you're a fan of Sorkin dialogue going at 100 miles an hour, I check out that. And then a film I mentioned a lot, but I mentioned already today, is Shame. Really underseen, really complex. One of my favourite endings to a film that really sticks with you. I just absolutely think it's brilliant. And Fassbender's in it. It's fantastic. Carey Mulligan's in it. It's amazing.
You mentioned Shame. It's an interesting point because that film, I would say, is rated, but it's underseen.
Underseen.
So there is this kind of crux. There are a lot of films we've mentioned in this sort of industry, and like Nocturnal Animals was quite well received, but not spoken about as much. So there is, and like 13 Lives actually was well reviewed.
Yes.
But criminally underseen.
It's sort of like a Prime film.
Yeah.
As an Amazon Prime. Just sort of like, maybe you saw it, maybe you didn't. I was attracted to it because of the cast.
Oh, really?
I'm like, Joel Edgerton, Viggo Mortensen, of course.
I just love the story. I thought it was great. And Ron Howard movie.
Brilliant.
So some other people's suggestions online. The King of Staten Island.
Yeah, great shout.
And you know what? Like, it is a good movie.
Yeah.
There are a list of directors I have in my head who like almost make great movies, and Judd Apatow is a director who almost makes great movies because they're great, they're good.
I'm happy he's still doing
but
it.
they're always 40 minutes too long.
Yeah,
they're always
they really
40
are.
minutes too long.
And you know what? It's too long, and some of the best scenes are when I feel like the scenes massively overstay their welcome, and I feel like he's just letting the dialogue run. But ironically, I think that's putting him into a runtime that I think doesn't justify itself.
Another director as well, who I think almost makes good movies, as we talked about earlier this year, is Jeff Nichols, who made The Bike Riders. It's like, that's almost a good movie. You've almost made a good movie there. Like, touching distance.
The more I think about The Bike Riders, I'm like, I double down on how I felt coming out of it. I'm like, it's so close, and so much of the bones of it are really fantastic, but what did we actually come away with there? If you've seen The Bike Riders, I think the film got started 20 minutes before it ended.
Yeah.
I thought you just had a really the first act. You just started your second act for me.
Pick a character.
What do you mean pick a character?
It's like,
sorry,
is it Tom Hardy's film? Is it Jodie Comer's film? Or is it Austin Butler's film?
Who are we following here?
Pick one, because
you set up Austin, and then he sort of like sits with his leg up for most of the film.
And then it becomes Jodie's film.
Jodie's
and then it ends as
narrating.
Tom Hardy's film. Yeah. It's pick one.
Yeah.
Even you could have even reframed it and made it Mike Feist's movie as the outsider coming in. But anyway, other films that are underrated. Quite a few people said Finding Dory.
Oh.
Which I don't see.
I've only seen it once. And not gone back to check it out.
Limitless.
Yeah, it's pretty cheesy, but a great concept film.
A film I've never seen, but actually it's always on my list, and a lot of people have always told me this film is underrated and was overlooked at the time, which is The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, the Ben Stiller movie. Because I know Ben Stiller's directed quite a few films, Reality Bites, The Cable Guy, and a lot of people I know say that because he directed Secret Life of Walter Mitty is good. It's got a very kind of different premise. It's kind of strange how big budget it is for that kind of movie.
The marketing around it was. Do you remember the marketing at the time? It's like it's Forrest Gump but modern. Just go with it. It's brilliant.
And I think they pushed it way too hard for that kind of movie. That kind of actually premise needs a little less push behind it.
It's interesting to see Ben Stiller put himself on the front of that film in a way you don't really see Ben Stiller do that with a lot of films. I actually haven't seen Ben Stiller in anything for a long time.
I think he's taking his time. He didn't direct or produce.
He's Severance is his baby, but I'm almost a bit like, you're not on screen really for that, are you?
People said Treasure Planet, which I've never seen.
Oh, no,
the Disney movie where it's like the space version of Treasure Island.
Yeah.
Quite a few people, and I'd say actually this is quite a common answer, was Babylon.
Okay, yeah. So,
and I guess it's that thing now, because it's so divisive. A lot of people will say it's underrated. A lot of people will say it's overrated, or rightly rated as sort of middling. But a lot of people say it's underrated.
When you say Babylon, you know what's funny is that in my mind's eye, I'm picturing the exact moment we saw it at the BFI IMAX that day, and I just have really fond memories of howling with laughter, and you like just hitting each other, thinking this scene is just absolutely brilliant, and I no doubt had a wonderful time many times in that film, but
way too long.
It's way too long, and it tries to do far too many things, and it doesn't really know how to tie itself together. Within there, I said this at the time, I really think there's a great 2-hour movie. And I think there's a reshoot and a great 2-hour movie in there. A really top 2-hour movie.
And the film studies montage it sort of closes with.
Yeah.
I'm like, come on.
I think the first 90 minutes is brilliant. The whole build up, you have to get this thing to the film
with the Spike
set.
Jonze on the film set as this crazed director. What a great way, excitement of evoking that era filmmaking.
Everything I'm saying says, well, it warrants a rewatch for me, but I'm going to need a few more years before I jump back into Babylon, and there's a chance I'll watch the first 2 hours and then just go, I'm all right, it's bedtime.
Forget Judd Apatow movies being long. That one, really.
We had a fan of ours who said he saw it, 6 times in the cinema? 3 times in the cinema?
6 times.
6 times in the cinema. That's a lot of hours.
But clearly it's resonating with some people. I have a feeling if a lot of people slightly younger than us who are getting into film, it's like a drug for them. It's like, wow, this is cinema. And no judgment at all. I think that's great. Yeah. It's like you're offering the history of cinema kind of on a plate in a 3-hour epic, which bizarrely, the making of that film reminds you of kind of the bloated epic filmmaking of the early filmmaking era. So
it's kind of, weirdly, like with Damien Chazelle, my problem with La La Land is that I feel like it tries to tackle, I think, too many things, or stylistically tries to achieve too many things. I much prefer Chazelle doing something a lot more stripped back. Even First Man, which is inherently quite an epic creative challenge to do the moon landing, that was nonetheless about something very specific, and it worked a lot more. Like Whiplash, about a very specific relationship dynamic. That works a lot more for me than trying to tackle the whole statement of Hollywood, or like what it means to do jazz in LA. It's like you didn't quite get me there.
Yeah. Well, that was the most underrated movies, or movies we just generally think are underrated. That concludes our 5 questions for today. Didn't we have fun running through those?
I loved that. It was really good fun.
I love just kind of when we get going, it's like cracking open the vault, and you realise that all the films you've ever seen are in there, and all the films that people have seen, and then they're talking to us about it. And I love being part of this open discussion. The sun has actually gone away now.
It's sort of popping in and out a little bit. But guys, as always, if you had any answers to any of those questions and you wanted to send them in, we'd of course love to hear what you have to say. You can send in your thoughts, your questions, your concerns, your reviews to hello@pulpkitchenpodcast.com, or you can support us on the VIP tier on Patreon and have priority access to have your question read out on the show.
It's a special episode. This was episode 146 of Pulp Kitchen. Thank you for joining us. If it's your first time joining us, it won't be like this every week.
No.
But if it's your a regular listener and a regular viewer, I hope you've enjoyed the slight change. I hope you've enjoyed the view if you've been watching. And, we've been shifting around on our bums a little bit, sat here on the lawn.
Falling down the hill a little bit.
Yeah, and it's been a little bit rough and ready, but we like it. And thank you for joining us. What else can we say, James? Other than
don't forget, new episodes every single Wednesday of Pulp Kitchen. If you want our access to our extra show, Double Take, we do a weekly news show every single week where we sit down and break down the latest news in terms of directors, casting, rumors, trailers. It's really great fun. It's our bonus show, and if you wanted to support us, it's exclusive to. You can either support us on Patreon or you can support us on Spotify if you listen on there, and that makes the biggest difference to help support what we do, and hopefully you get some great content out of it. It's only sort of a cost of a premium iced latte at Starbucks a month, and you get 4 episodes for that, and that massively makes a difference. So please do consider.
It helps us do stuff like this.
Yes,
like it gives us the confidence to make this our job and create great content, as we hope we are doing. And this week on Double Take, we talked about
James Cameron's new
James
film.
Cameron's has rumored to be doing a new film post Avatar. It's not Avatar related. We've got an update on the Josh Safdie movie, not the Safdie brothers, but Josh Safdie's own independent movie. We talked a little bit about Presumed Innocent. I'm halfway through watching that. I had a little comment about the way that streaming shows might be made for their platforms. We talked about Mamma Mia quickly, I watched that for the first time. And we talked about these views that Harmony Korine, the director, had given at the Venice Film Festival, which was really interesting. It was a nice discussion.
So please, if you want to go and check that out, go and do so. But in the meantime, thank you for listening to us. We will be back next week with more Pulp Kitchen fun. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining us. Have a great week, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.